Okay, let's unpack this. We are stepping into the sun-drenched yet deeply solitary world of Edward Hopper.
That's right, 1882 to 1967. And for so many people, his work it's really the visual definition of 20th century American life.
It is. We're looking at an American realist painter and printmaker who is, rightly considered one of the absolute masters of his time.
And he didn't just paint modern American life, he somehow captured its underlying pulse. I mean, critics at the time talked about his ability to create subdued drama out of commonplace subjects layered with poetic meaning.
That Hopper vibe, it's just so recognizable, and it's entirely unique. It's a feeling that's really defined by his core obsessions. Solitude, that tension between light and shadow, and the quiet weight of introspection. You look at a Hopper painting, it doesn't matter if it's a woman by a window or an all-night diner, and you feel that specific, profound silence. So our mission today is to try and cut through the decades of mythology that had built up around this deeply private and complex man.
And our sources cover his entire arc. I mean, the struggle to get recognition, his intensely methodical process, his artistic vision, and then his just astonishing influence on everything from, say, Mark Rothko to Alfred Hitchcock.
So for you, the listener, the mission is to really extract those specific techniques and the psychological drivers that made him such a pivotal figure in American realism.
A figure who was praised in his own time for achieving complete verity. That's the phrase they used. The complete truth in the America he chose to portray.
And if we need one single image that just perfectly encapsulates that mastery, that balance of composition, form, and that evocative, isolating light, we have to start with the most famous piece, don't we?
We have to. It's got to be Nighthawks from 1942.
Of course.
That image. The customers under that stark fluorescent glow of the diner, totally separated from the impenetrable dark street outside. It's a masterclass in composition and mood.
It really is.
It perfectly exemplifies that quiet, introspective scene. The feeling of being alone, even when you're surrounded by others, that define his entire career, and really, it sets the stage for everything we're about to analyze.
So let's start that story. And it doesn't begin in some gritty New York City gallery, but in the quiet, middle-class comfort of Nyack, New York.
Right, born in 1882. And this was a community that was really defined by its proximity to the Hudson River. It was a yacht-building center, deeply connected to maritime life.
And that grounding is so important to understand, isn't it?
It's crucial. He came from a comfortably well-off, middle-class family, Dutch ancestry, and was raised in a very strict Baptist home.
What did that mean for the household dynamic?
Well, his father, Garrett, was apparently quite mild-natured. The household was really matriarchal. It was his mother, his grandmother, his sister, and a maid. And that upbringing, you can see how it instilled a sense of reserve, of order, and maybe a degree of internal constraint that comes out later in his art.
In that very disciplined but emotionally charged art?
Exactly. And the talent was there, I mean, right away. By age 5, his skill for drawing was just completely apparent.
So this wasn't one of those stories of a child having to fight for the right to be an artist?
Not at all. His parents encouraged it. They supplied him with materials, with instructional magazines, illustrated books. It really laid the foundation for his lifelong visual acuity.
But there was a catch.
A huge catch. And it speaks directly to the central tension of his early life. While they encouraged the art, they absolutely insisted that he study commercial art to ensure a reliable income.
Which he hated.
He detested it. And this forced him to dedicate years of his life to a field he found creatively bankrupt. And it created this deep-seated resentment toward illustration that really shadowed his entire early career.
It's so interesting, too, that before he fully committed to painting, his dreams were tied to his environment there in Nyack. He actually fantasized about becoming a naval architect.
Yeah, carving little wooden models of sailboats and barges. And you can see that connection to clean architectural lines and the careful study of form, the geometry of a hull, the rigging. It's absolutely visible in the rigor of his later compositions.
So that inclination was then formally honed. He initially tried a correspondence course in 1899, but he pretty quickly transferred to the New York School of Art and Design,
which was the forerunner of the Parsons School of Design. And he spent 6 really formative years there mastering his craft.
And those 6 years gave him 2 critical influences, but they sort of pushed him in slightly different directions.
Right. The first was William Merritt Chase, a figure who was really steeped in the European tradition. Hopper learned oil painting under Chase, and early on you can see him modeling his style after impressionists like Edouard Manet and Edgar Degas.
And the second influence, maybe the more transformative one,
Had to be Robert Henri, who taught the life class. Henri was a radical for his time. He was the philosophical leader of the Ashen School, which, advocated for painting scenes of everyday, unvarnished city life.
And his advice was revolutionary. He told his students, forget about art and paint pictures of what interests you in life.
And, crucially, make a stir in the world.
That advice sounds like the exact blueprint for the kind of subject matter Hopper would later become famous for. The lonely streets, the quiet interiors.
It does, but here's the fascinating twist. He takes 3 trips to Europe between 1906 and 1910. He's in Paris, the absolute epicenter of modern art.
And he completely insulates himself.
Completely. He was, by all accounts, willfully unaffected by the new currents. Cubism, Fauvism, all this revolutionary abstraction sweeping the continent.
Yeah.
He just ignored it.
It's amazing.
He worked mostly alone, and he later made the genuinely astonishing claim that he did not remember hearing of Picasso at all.
Which can't be literal ignorance. That has to be a statement.
It has to be. It's an immediate, deep commitment to his own developing realist vision, even as the entire art world was shifting so dramatically around him.
But he wasn't completely untouched by Europe. He did take away specific artistic impressions.
Oh, sure, but they were almost exclusively traditional. He admired Goya, and he was profoundly affected by Rembrandt. He called The Night Watch the most wonderful thing of his I have seen. It's past belief in its reality.
And that word reality is key. And the dramatic use of light.
He also studied the French engraver Charles Marion, whose moody, meticulously detailed Paris scenes he imitated. So his influences weren't about abstract color or new forms. They were about composition, shadow, and emotional weight.
So once he returns from that last European trip, that early tension just explodes into this prolonged period of deep professional struggle.
Yeah, he gets a studio in New York City, which he would keep for the rest of his life, but his oil painting essentially languished. He was forced back into commercial illustration, which he considered beneath him, for publications like System and Hotel Management.
And this was over a decade of just severe creative frustration.
It was. His fellow illustrator, Walter Tittle, gave us this heartbreaking insight into Hopper's state of mind at the time. He described him suffering from long periods of unconquerable inertia, sitting for days at a time before his easel in helpless unhappiness.
Wow. The artist famous for capturing stillness was literally paralyzed by it himself, just sitting before an empty canvas completely blocked.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? The man who so perfectly captured American melancholy was living it for years.
He did have an early flicker of hope, though, at the monumental 1913 Armory Show.
Yes, he sold his first painting, Sailing, from 1911 for $250.
But he was 31.
Right, he was 31, and that sale was a total one-off. His career did not catch fire, and he was stuck in commercial art for another decade. The crucial turning point, though, came not in oil, but in printmaking.
This is in 1915. Facing this impasse with oil painting, he turns to etching.
And by 1923, he'd produced about 70 detailed works in that medium.
So why was etching so pivotal for his development?
Because etching forced him to master line and tone and composition in miniature. And it was in that medium that his signature emotional themes first really solidified. You see the geometric cinematic compositions, the themes of silence and solitude emerge in works like Night on the L Train.
With the couples who are physically close but emotionally just miles apart.
Exactly. Or Evening Wind, with the solitary female figure caught in that moment of introspection. These etchings let him work out the visual architecture and the mood that he would later transfer seamlessly to his large canvases.
He did get some recognition during this period. He won a prize for a war poster, Smash the Hun, in 1918.
And the Logan Prize from the Chicago Society of Etchers in 1923. But the real pivot point, the event that finally freed him from the illustration work he hated, was about to happen. And it came through a surprising personal connection.
Okay, so after years of sitting in front of that empty easel, paralyzed by inertia, what finally broke the deadlock?
That brings us directly to Josephine Nivison. This was the moment that fundamentally shifted both his personal world and his professional trajectory.
He re-encountered Jo Nivison in Gloucester in 1923 during a summer painting trip. They'd actually known each other for years.
They had. She was also an artist and, notably, a former student of Robert Henri, which linked them through that shared artistic lineage. They married a year later in 1924.
And the contrast between the two of them is just, it's almost cartoonishly dramatic.
Their dynamic became legendary. Hopper was tall, extremely secretive, shy, quiet, and politically conservative. Jo was short, utterly open, gregarious, sociable, and quite liberal.
It was a relationship of fierce passion, but also constant, often sharp friction.
Hmm. And that famous quote from Jo Nivison just perfectly captures the challenge of living with such a reserved man. She said, "Sometimes talking to Eddie is just like dropping a stone in a well, except that it doesn't thump when it hits bottom."
That says so much about his silence, his unwillingness, or just inability to share his inner world.
But despite all that tension, Jo Nivison was absolutely critical to his success. She subordinated her own promising artistic career to his, and she became his de facto manager. She handled his interviews, she tracked his sales, she made sure he had the space to work.
And crucially, she was his primary model.
And constant life companion. She appears in almost all of his figurative works from 1923 onward, often in various guises or states of dress, depending on the mood he needed.
And she was the key catalyst for his professional breakthrough. Seeing him struggle with oils, she was the one who encouraged him to work in watercolor.
And that seemingly small change just unlocked everything.
It was gold.
It really was. In 1923, 6 of the Gloucester watercolors he produced were accepted into an exhibit at the prestigious Brooklyn Museum, and one of them, the mansard roof, was purchased for the permanent collection for $100.
The money wasn't transformative, but the critical reaction was ecstatic.
Critics raved. They talked about the vitality, force, and directness of his work, even when he was depicting the most homeliest subject.
And the pace of change from there just accelerated dramatically. The very next year, 1924, he sold out his first one-man show based almost entirely on those watercolors.
And at age 41, he was finally financially secure enough to quit commercial illustration permanently.
It must have felt like a liberation after decades of creative compromise.
A profound liberation, but it came late. And despite all the fame and stability that followed, he retained this deep-seated bitterness about that slow start. The struggle really left a permanent mark.
The financial ascent from there was rapid, though. In 1927, his oil painting, Two on the Isle, sold for $1,500.
And this allowed him to make a purchase that fundamentally changed his ability to find subjects. An automobile.
The car was essential, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It let them take field trips outside of New York City and scout new material all across New England. It provided that mobile vantage point that is so central to his later work. The gas stations, the motels, the lonely roads.
What's remarkable is how he fared during the Great Depression. While so many artists were suffering, Hopper's career actually surged.
He was already considered a blue-chip artist. In 1931 alone, major institutions like the Whitney and the Met started paying thousands of dollars for his work. He sold 30 pieces that year, which is a testament to his value during an era of extreme austerity.
And we have to highlight the symbolic power of the Museum of Modern Art acquisition.
Oh, absolutely. House by the Railroad, painted in 1925, was donated to MoMA in 1930. This was a massive landmark moment. It was the very first oil painting acquired for MoMA's collection, which just cemented Hopper's reputation as the definitive painter of modern American moods.
And this all culminated in MoMA giving him his first large-scale retrospective in 1933.
Exactly. And despite all the wealth and fame, their life remained strikingly simple. They lived in the same spare walk-up apartment at 3 Washington Square North in Greenwich Village for the rest of their lives.
A choice that reinforced the Spartan-focused nature of his work.
And their routine was sacrosanct. Winters in the village, summers on Cape Cod. They started renting in South Truro in 1930 and then built their own iconic summer house there in 1934.
And this period, the late 30s and early 40s, was just incredibly productive. It gave us his most recognizable masterpieces.
New York Movie in 39, Nighthawks in 42, Hotel Lobby in 43.
Yet, even in his years of success, that famous inertia never truly disappeared.
No, it didn't. He suffered a period of relative inactivity in the late 40s and 50s due to health issues. He had several prostate surgeries. He even admitted the frustration, saying, "I wish I could paint more. I get sick of reading and going to the movies."
But he continued to produce powerful work, even if it was slowly.
Yeah.
Pieces like Morning Sun and Intermission.
He did. He received the Edward McDowell Medal for outstanding contributions to American culture in 1966, which really confirmed his status as a national icon.
Edward Hopper died in his Washington Square studio on May 15, 1967. He was 84. And Jo, his wife, his model, his manager, followed him just 10 months later.
And this brings us to one of the most significant parts of his enduring legacy, the monumental bequest. Josephine bequeathed their joint collection, an astonishing trove of over 3,000 pieces, to the Whitney Museum of American Art.
Which single-handedly cemented the Whitney as the central, indispensable repository for Hopper's life's work.
It guaranteed his future scholarship, though, as the sources point out, even his death led to some controversy about where all his work ended up.
Right, the Sanborn acquisition.
Exactly. While the Whitney got the main collection, a Baptist minister who cared for Hopper's sister came into possession of about 300 drawings and paintings. And art historians have noted the lack of clear provenance for this specific collection, raising questions about whether that trove was willingly gifted or just acquired under unclear circumstances.
Highlighting the continuous complexities that surround the management of a master's estate. Okay, when we look at a man who was so fiercely private, who struggled for decades yet achieved such heights, we really need to understand the analytical engine behind the work. What fundamentally made his realism so different and so powerful.
The key is that profound tension you mentioned earlier, the tension between the inner emotional life and the outward, almost mathematically rigorous technique.
And Hopper actually articulated this himself.
He did in his 1953 handwritten note, known simply as his statement. He insisted that great art is always the outward expression of an inner life in the artist, and that this life results in a personal vision of the world.
So he wasn't just describing things, he was externalizing internal psychology.
Precisely. And critically, he explicitly rejected the idea that mere skill or invention could replace imagination.
Which immediately positions him against the prevailing movement of the mid-20th century abstract expressionism.
Absolutely. By saying invention couldn't replace imagination, he was offering a subtle but very clear critique of abstraction's dominance. He was arguing for the necessity of engaging with the physical world.
For Hopper, reality wasn't a constraint. It was the vehicle for conveying profound emotion.
Right. And this ties directly into his documented interest in Freud and the subconscious mind. He wrote that the important qualities in art are put there unconsciously, and that little of true importance comes from the conscious intellect. The feelings have to precede the paint.
But here's the paradox we have to unpack. How does a painter so obsessed with the subconscious become so meticulously, almost mathematically, structured in his process?
That is the ultimate Hopper contradiction. His process was famously slow and agonizingly methodical. He once said, "I don't start painting until I have it all worked out in my mind."
So the feeling might come from the unconscious, but the execution was completely calculated.
Totally calculated. He paid extreme, obsessive attention to geometrical design, to architectural proportion, and the precise balance of figures within their environment.
And we see this dedication to calculation even in his private notes, right? He and Joe kept these meticulous ledgers for his works.
They did. They would document the subject, the colors, even the emotional intent, noting details like sad face of woman unlit or thighs cooler in specific paintings. For the artists who claimed to paint the unconscious, the prep work was intensely conscious.
That methodical approach is just perfectly illustrated by the famous anecdote about New York movie.
It really is. The painting depicts an usherette standing under this dramatic light in a vast, empty theater. And for that one figure in the interior composition, Hopper made over 53 preparatory sketches.
53. It's incredible.
He was essentially mapping out the light, the vanishing points, the exact placement of every single element before the brush even touched the canvas.
But the single most celebrated and immediately effective tool he used to manipulate emotion was, without question, his mastery of light and shadow.
Light is the central character in a Hopper painting. It's crucial for generating mood. It often acts as an emblem of insight or revelation, and it's contrasted sharply by these deep, defined shadows.
And when the light is bright, it feels almost clinical.
Yes, forcing you to confront the isolation. Take two very different examples. Early Sunday Morning from 1930 and Sun in an Empty Room from 1963.
Okay.
Early Sunday Morning is this long, sunlit row of brick storefronts. The sharp, low-angle morning light rakes across the facades, emphasizing the vertical geometry and the complete absence of human life. It's a desolate scene defined entirely by light.
And Sun in an Empty Room.
Painted late in his life, it's even more extreme. It is simply a study of sunlight streaming into a room, a pure investigation of form and light with no figure, no narrative. It's minimalism achieved through realism.
And that dramatic manipulation of light, especially that sharp division between interior and exterior, leads directly to comparisons with cinema.
Absolutely. His dramatic use of high-contrast light and shadow, combined with his frequent use of slightly elevated or voyeuristic camera angles, has been compared directly to the cinematography of film noir. He understood how light could create tension, moral ambiguity, and that feeling of existential dread.
So we have this psychologically charged, geometrically perfect approach. What did that yield in terms of his actual style? We call him a realist, but he's certainly not a photorealist.
No, not at all. We define his style as soft realism. He simplified shape and architectural details. He removed the visual clutter of reality. He wasn't interested in rendering every single brick. He was interested in the feeling of the structure.
And he used saturated color to heighten that feeling.
Exactly, to heighten contrast and mood, ensuring that the visual impact was immediate and powerful.
How did his contemporaries see him? Where did they place him in the broader art historical context?
He was a clear outlier. He consciously avoided the overt action and violence you find in the work of his Ashcan School contemporaries, like John Sloan or George Bellows, and he refused to glamorize city structures in the way that, say, Joseph Stella or Georgia O'Keeffe did. He offered something much colder, more introspective.
And he was celebrated for that independence.
Indeed he was. The painter Charles Birchfield, whom Hopper greatly admired, praised him for his complete verity and his sturdy American independence, and he drew a favorable comparison to the 19th century master Thomas Eakins.
Which would have meant the world to Hopper.
Oh, it was the highest praise. Hopper considered Eakins the greatest American painter, so he was seen as capturing the pulse of the city as desolate and dangerous rather than elegant or seductive, a clear acknowledgement that his quiet scenes carried enormous psychological weight.
Hopper had this unique gift. He could take the most banal, commonplace features of American infrastructure, the diners, the gas pumps, the anonymous rooms, and render them emotionally profound. Let's look closer at how he used these primary subjects, starting with architecture.
He was deeply fascinated by American buildings. He described his attraction to our native architecture with its hideous beauty, its fantastic roofs, with eye-searing color or delicate harmonies of faded paint.
For him, architecture wasn't just a setting. It was a psychological container for modern life.
Exactly. And the best example of architecture achieving character status is House by the Railroad, that 1925 oil painting that became MoMA's first oil acquisition.
It's the ultimate case study.
It is. It depicts an isolated, severe Victorian mansion rendered in this stark light, and it's partly obscured by a raised railroad embankment. Art critic Lloyd Goodrich called it one of the most poignant and desolating pieces of realism.
The structure itself feels cut off,
Yeah.
separated from society by that physical barrier of the tracks.
Right.
It's an instant visual metaphor for isolation.
It is. But this brings us back to that narrative controversy. Hopper often insisted he was just painting what he saw.
Right. I'm just painting the sunlight on the building.
He did. He claimed he was more interested in the physical elements than any inherent symbolism. But the genius of Hopper is that his composition and his subject choice made the isolation an inevitable byproduct of the verity he was aiming for. A silent, isolated house next to a perpetually moving railroad line is inherently poignant.
And that pervasive sense of being cut off leads us directly into his primary emotional themes: solitude, loneliness, regret, boredom, resignation.
And these are best expressed through his figures. Hopper's solitary figures are overwhelmingly women, usually caught in moments of quiet contemplation. They're often reading, looking out a window, or doing some mundane task in a public space, yet they're completely isolated within it.
Like an automat, or hotel room, or girl at sewing machine.
All perfect examples. And what makes these figures so powerful, so psychologically exposed, is the compositional intensity.
Take hotel room.
Okay, hotel room. It shows a woman sitting on a bed reading a railroad timetable. The composition is stark. He uses these broad, spare, vertical, and diagonal bands of color, the edge of the bed, the wall, the window frame, and these sharp electric shadows to create what's been described as a concise and intense drama in the night.
And when he did depict couples, that isolation wasn't relieved. In fact, it was often magnified.
Precisely. The couples are usually physically together but psychologically miles apart. Room in New York from 1932 is a prime example. We see a young couple in an apartment. He's engrossed in a newspaper. She's idly by the piano. Their gazes never meet.
And we, the viewer, are positioned as a voyeur, peering in through the window.
A technique he loved, peering into their lack of intimacy. You see the same alienation in Cape Cod Evening, where an older couple shares the same porch but are absorbed in different internal worlds.
He even used this psychological geometry to tackle grander philosophical themes. The 1959 work, Excursion into Philosophy, is particularly telling.
It is. And Joe Hopper's notes for this piece are essential. They confirm that the open book lying beside the dejected man on the bed is Plato. Reread too late.
Reread too late. Wow.
The painting is widely interpreted as this man being paralyzed, trapped between the earthly domain, represented by the partially clad woman on the bed, and the higher spiritual domain, which is that intense ethereal lightfall on the floor.
Mhm.
It externalizes the pain of intellectual contemplation versus carnal reality.
And then we reach the work that summarizes all these themes, combining figures and architecture into one potent image. Nighthawks.
Nighthawks is not just a painting. It's a cultural touchstone. It shows customers in an all-night diner, and the entire composition is a masterclass in geometry. The counter, the diner itself, they're these cinematic diagonal shapes that pull your eye deep into the scene.
And the glass seems to trap the figures.
Mm.
It reflects the light in a way that separates that harsh, sulfurous yellow interior light from the dead, dark night surrounding it.
Which just enhances the mood of isolation and late-night vulnerability.
So it's universally interpreted as a portrait of wartime anxiety or modern urban loneliness. But what did Hopper himself say about it?
Well, he fought those literary interpretations, as always. He insisted he was just interested in the physical elements, the contrast of the electric light against the dark street. But later, he offered this surprisingly blunt, narrative-heavy interpretation that just shifts the entire scene's tension.
What was it?
He suggested that Nighthawks had more to do with the possibility of predators in the night than with simple loneliness.
That reframes everything. Suddenly they're not just lonely figures, they're potential targets or participants in some silent nocturnal drama.
Right, and it highlights the larger narrative controversy that followed him his whole career. He absolutely resented being pigeonholed as a sentimental chronicler of sadness.
He pushed back hard. I'm thinking of that great anecdote about Cape Cod morning.
Oh, it's perfect. When Joe offered a very specific narrative, that the woman was looking out to see if the weather's good enough to hang out her wash, Hopper just snapped, "You're making it Norman Rockwell. From my point of view, she's just looking out the window."
He deliberately rejected those comparisons to American scene painters like Grant Wood. He was focused on the self, the internal vision.
And it highlights how crucial it is to respect the duality of his work. The surface is pure observation, but the arrangement of those observations is pure psychology. Even the titles were often misleading. Early Sunday Morning was originally called 7th Avenue Shops.
The Sunday was tacked on later, reinforcing the very desolation he'd already captured.
Right. We also can't forget his landscapes and seascapes. He had three main groups: pure studies of rocks and sea, architectural depictions of lighthouses and farmhouses, and sailboats. And interestingly, he overwhelmingly depicted strong light and fair weather.
And his rural scenes managed to fuse that sense of melancholy and solitude with the physical reality of the American highway. Gas from 1940 is the definitive road piece.
It is. Gas captures that transition between dusk and night. It has a solitary figure, a simple sign, and the lonely road stretching away into the darkness. It's been called a different, equally clean, well-lighted refuge,
A necessary stop for those traversing the American landscape.
keeping its melancholy vigil. It perfectly captures that specific feeling of vulnerability when the last bits of daylight fade on a long journey.
And as a final, quiet note to his career, we have two comedians painted just a year before his death.
It's a stunning, quiet farewell. It shows a male and female pantomime actor, their faces blank, their costumes pure white, taking a bow on a dark, empty stage.
And Joe confirmed this was intentionally symbolic.
She did. It was meant to represent them taking their life's last bows together as husband and wife. It's a beautifully theatrical epitaph that manages to encapsulate their entire complex, intertwined life in one final, elegant, and silent scene.
Hopper didn't just paint America. He defined how a huge swath of the 20th century, from filmmakers to poets, understood and depicted modern isolation. His influence goes so far beyond the canvas.
It's a testament to the universality of his work, especially when you consider he had no formal students. He was often seen as an isolated figure, professionally speaking, and yet his structural and emotional rigor resonates so deeply with the next generation.
Even abstract expressionists who ostensibly rejected realism cited him as crucial.
Right. And you have to ask, why would artists like Willem de Kooning and Mark Rothko, who dealt in pure abstraction, look to a master realist like Hopper? What was the mechanism of that influence?
It wasn't about the subject matter.
No, it was about the structure. Hopper's soft realism, his simplification of forms, his ruthless editing of detail. It appealed to artists who were concerned with flatness and geometric composition. The very flatness and rigorous internal architecture that made his painting so intense provided a foundational structure for those who wanted to push into pure color and form.
And we have a specific visual link with Rothko, don't we?
A very direct one. Mark Rothko's early figurative work, Composition I, from around 1931, is recognized by scholars as a direct visual paraphrase of Hopper's Chop Suey from 1929. The way Hopper uses simplified fields of color and flat planes to define space influenced Rothko before he moved into his famous color field paintings.
They understood that Hopper was using realism to explore abstraction.
Exactly. And beyond fine art, his dramatic lighting and precise, often voyeuristic compositions were a direct gift to cinema. I mean, it's impossible to talk about cinematic loneliness without evoking his visual language.
His canvases feel like meticulously composed still frames.
They do. Take House by the Railroad, that isolated Victorian structure. That single painting heavily influenced the design of the iconic Bates Motel house in Alfred Hitchcock's masterpiece, Psycho.
It also informed the mood and setting of Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven. Hopper provided the visual shorthand for American psychological dread and solitude.
And Nighthawks is practically a cinematic blueprint for urban alienation.
It is continuously referenced.
Recreated as tableaux vivants in films like Pennies from Heaven, it perfectly captured the mood Ridley Scott was looking for in the rainy cityscapes of Blade Runner. And perhaps most dramatically, the Italian horror director Dario Argento literally recreated the diner set for a key sequence in his film Deep Red.
It shows how perfectly Hopper's geometry translates to high-stakes visual drama.
It does. And even the lighting for the crime drama Road to Perdition drew direct inspiration from Hopper's specific use of interior light, especially in his theater paintings like New York Movie.
This cultural permeation is just total. It crosses genres and decades. It even extends into music and literature in really surprising ways.
And think about the irony here. The reclusive conservative Baptist artists influencing these pop culture giants. Tom Waits' 1975 album is called Nighthawks at the Diner.
It perfectly captures that dark, smoky, late-night atmosphere in musical form.
And then, maybe most jarringly, Madonna named her bombastic 1993 world tour The Girly Show after Hopper's 1941 painting of the same name.
A painting for which Joe posed nude in front of the stove.
Right. The quietest artist in America provided the visual inspiration for one of the most theatrical spectacles of the decade.
That contrast is phenomenal. It just shows the incredible, adaptable power of his imagery.
It does. And in literature, his work is a magnet for the genre of ekphrasis poetry or prose inspired by visual art. His ambiguity, his refusal to provide a narrative, makes his work perfect for writers who want to project their own stories onto those silent scenes.
And that necessity to fill the silence is what drew in a great American storyteller like Stephen King.
Exactly. The 2016 anthology In Sunlight or in Shadow featured short stories inspired by his paintings. King's story, The Music Room, was directly inspired by Room in New York, exploring the voyeurism and that profound lack of intimacy he captured. Hopper provides the stage, and the writer provides the untold drama.
Finally, we have to talk about the market impact. Given his careful, methodical pace, Hopper wasn't prolific. He painted only 366 canvases over his lifetime.
Which means his works are incredibly rare, and that scarcity drives the price to astronomical heights. I mean, back in 2006, Hotel Window, which was sold by the actor Steve Martin, set a massive record at the time, going for $26.89 million.
Just 7 years later, East Wind over Weehawken sold for $36 million.
And the current staggering record, set very recently, proves that Hopper remains the defining master of American psychological realism in the marketplace.
This is Chop Suey.
Yes. In 2018, his 1929 painting Chop Suey went to auction. This was the same painting that inspired Mark Rothko's early work. It set the current record, selling for an astounding $91.9 million. That figure is a cold, hard acknowledgement that Hopper did more than just capture American life. He created the lasting myth of American isolation.
This has been a true deep dive into the dual nature of Edward Hopper. We've seen him transition from a struggling, frustrated illustrator to an American master whose meticulous process and unique eye for light really defined the emotional landscape of the modern world. His quiet, introspective approach didn't just capture American realism, it elevated it through the sheer power of structure and silence.
And that central tension is just inescapable. We talked about his belief that the most important qualities in art are placed there unconsciously, but we also saw the extreme, almost industrial control he exerted over his composition.
Dozens of preparatory sketches for a single figure.
Exactly. And we, the viewers, are constantly searching for the conscious narrative. We add our own meaning, our own titles, our own stories to his silent scenes, whether we're directors recreating the diner or poets writing about the light.
Which leaves us with the ultimate provocative question that Hopper forces us to consider.
Given his continuous, often fierce insistence that he was only painting the sunlight on a building or just a structure on a lonely road, was he truly a formalist purist dedicated only to geometry, form, and light? Or was the overwhelming melancholy, the isolation, and the profound emotional resonance he achieved so deeply inherent in the American landscape he chose to capture that the profound feeling was simply an inevitable, unavoidable byproduct of his unflinching, complete verity?
That tension between formal purity and overwhelming feeling is the silent deep dive Hopper leaves for you to explore.